we can make yourself comfortable wherever. And excuse me, I'm going to use my phone for notes here. So, okay, so we are in charge of talking about value versus values. I think a lot of the earlier panels and presentations today have done a really great job of framing the problem, and I've heard a lot of hunger during lunch around wanting more solutions. So fortunately, this panel is going to be broken into two parts. The first part, we're going to talk about the value, so solutions for how people are using data to bring more value to women and girls, and then the second part will be on how do you actually do that ethically. So with that, I would love for each of you to introduce yourselves briefly. Megan? Megan, would you like to start?
Hi, my name is Megan Smith. I'm the CEO of Shift 7, which I co-founded with Susan and Puneet. Susan's back there. I used to be the U.S. Chief Technology Officer, and before that I was in Silicon Valley building a lot of tech things, Google, smartphones, and I'm on the MIT board.
Oh, sorry. No, it's okay. I just wanted you to know you had a mic.
Okay, I have a mic. Okay, my name is Nevejan. I come from Amsterdam. I'm Chief Science Officer there, and I'm a professor at university where I work on rhythm and data and architecture, designing urban experience.
Did you say rhythm?
I said rhythm.
Nice, I love it.
Hi, my name is Anna Lerner. I am currently at Facebook. I work on Facebook's Data for SDG initiative. Previous to that, I spent 7 years with the World Bank, before that 5 years in Southern Africa, all trying to kind of use data and technology to solve global challenges.
Wonderful. Okay, so for the first half of the panel, I wanted to talk about the value part of the title. And there are three themes that I've sort of picked out in terms of how you extract value at the intersection of gender and data. And we've talked about two of them already throughout the day. One is how do you use gender as a lens to analyze existing data? Another one is how do you collect data on women and girls? But I think a third one that we are also going to talk about is how do you collect data that is relevant and beneficial for women and girls, not necessarily about them, but can be utilized by them. So first, Carolyn, I want to start with you on the topic of analyzing data in a gender-sensitive way. You mentioned that you do research on city rhythms. So I would love if you could share a little bit more about what that even means and what the research you're doing is, and give an example of how that research has been beneficial.
Yeah, so for me the challenge is to make sure that we as human beings don't adapt to the technology, but the technology to us. And what's really very critical to our own being and our planet is that we are rhythm-based. Breath, seasons, the moon, we are rhythm-based. And technology is not. So that's how the quest started quite a few years ago. And with 6 cities, with a lot of students' help also, and colleagues, we analyzed social issues in neighborhoods. So we went really granular into the neighborhood, where we have had problems like single mothers don't use the services that are there for them. Youth is very much get a lot of prejudice without being allowed to be on a square. Old people don't walk into the park. I mean, really simple questions, seemingly simple questions. And then first in the real life, by doing social science methodologies and architectural methodologies, we analyzed how social structures are, how so both in time and place. We identified rhythms. So we analyze the problem, then we go to the rhythm, we analyze the rhythms, and then out of the rhythms we discuss it with the people. And then with the people you find a new way into a problem, which is very interesting. So it's a new solution space. And then we go back to the real world and we try things. And for example, with single mothers, there's a certain borough, there are a lot of single mothers, they're very young, they have too many kids, they don't go to school, so a lot of services are made for these mothers. But the hours that these services are available do not match the hours that the women, because the kids are in school and you have to take care of them, cannot go there. Second, the kind of rhythm of the single mothers, which is for all the time, improvisation with a kid that's crying, a kid that walks away. So improvisation, you cannot queue in a line because, one kid starts to cry, walks away, you're out of the line, you don't start again, So we found that actually we can put millions in there, they will not use it. While the story is they are not willing, they're too dumb, they're lazy. Oh, that's the story. So that we proved. So we go to the municipality, we say, what shall we do? So what are the networks they use? So we analyzed the rhythm of the mothers, and we found that there are informal places that adapt to their rhythm. It's called neighborhood rooms. It's really funny. Often run by elder women. There the women can come, the kids can play, and at the same time they can fill in the forms and do the things they need to do. So we said to the policymakers, stop all these services, put your money in the neighborhood rooms. And then 2 years later we came back and we said, so how is it now? And they said, great, we put the money in the neighborhood rooms. I said, so we have a new policy now. I want to have a new policy, then I'm effective. He said, no, it's not policy yet. Because that needs something else. So that's a gap. So the policy is still in a very 19th century causality paradigm, where if you go to the big data or real-time data or new ways to think about these things, then you need also other policymakers. So my challenge is, if you talk data and gender and for women, I look at design. So I look at how can I use data to design new applications, and we will talk later about the waterphone. And I also think about we have to change the discourse on the data. And rhythm is one of the ways for me now, it's one of the first, where I have another entry with other language. So in data, so we then went to all the data of the neighborhoods using a trust model that I made. And then we found, we made a language for data and rhythm. You're going to like this. So what is a beat? What is a beat in data? Think about it. Who knows? What is a beat in data? Dang. Dang. What's the beat? Huh?
Data point, like when you find some insight.
When you find some insight?
Or multiple, just whatever, I don't know.
Oh, you have a large data set.
Where things are located.
You have to put it in your, yeah.
Where things are located, what people are thinking, like the data itself.
But you need a beat.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Huh? Periodicity. Yeah, you then so we were in that also for a long time into that loop. Anyway, it took a long time for an interdisciplinary team. In the end, we decided data is a moment of transition. If you go from one state to another state. And then we threw this all in a very big pot for the whole group. And then we did a sort of cluster analysis. And then we found we have 7 base rhythms for social safety in neighborhoods in the Netherlands. Also, there's a picture.
Slides for this.
Yeah, there are slides there.
Could we bring that up?
Yeah, there are slides. And so that's very interesting because then thought, can it be that there?
Yours out. Where are they? Do we know?
Oh, they might be.
They might be ordered, and maybe we go out of order.
Okay. I can also show them later.
Well, you
I
guys
can also
have
tell
it?
the story. The funny thing is that we found that there are actually 7 base rhythms in the Netherlands, in neighborhoods, in these 6 cities.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
Yeah. Go down. Yeah. Go a bit more. Down. One more. Go down. Yeah, here. So on top, well, if you go to the last one, can you go to the last one first?
That one?
All the way further down, all the way.
Like that?
One further down. That was the mothers. This one black one more down. Yes, this, yeah? So here you see, these are the 7 cities, and you have 7 colors. So you see that in all these neighborhoods, these are squares of 500 meters by 500 meters. The data says there is a base rhythm for social safety. So then we go back 2 slides, I think. We thought, let's go to these neighborhoods, and see whether whether we feel it's the same rhythm. One more back, I think. Yeah. So then we went to all these streets, and then we find that the red bass rhythm really resonates with the red bass rhythm in another street. Very funny, yeah? Because, how can this be? Because we threw all these trust data together. So we now got a lot of money to find out why this is. That's what we're working on now. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah, very nice. And then in these bass rhythms, you also have street rhythms. I also have a dynamic visualization, no time here now. But you can see exactly which street resembles which street in another city. And you can also see, here we have data over 4 years. So you can see how this street went from beat 1 to beat 2, 3, 4, and how you go through the different states. Yeah, it's very cool. So we create magic with data.
That was wonderful. I really love that. Megan.
Yeah.
So you have also spent a lot of your work analyzing the absence of women and girls in media in terms of using it as a call to action to address the lack of visibility of women and girls and the work that they do. So could you talk a little bit about the data analysis? You have a data analysis that you want to show that was visualized on pudding, and more about that particular.
Yeah, so this idea, like just this idea of collective genius, and community organizing. So community organizing innovation. And could you really solution make through inclusion? Like the more you included more people participating and figuring out what we were going to do, the more I figured out. And by the way, Nikola Tesla once said, the way to understand the universe is look at frequency, energy, and vibration. Yeah. So kind of cool.
We like
the rhythm. So what we've been looking at is like, how do you accelerate more people to have the confidence they deserve to have? So we can all work together and more people, like the surface area of solution making. If you actually included everyone, you could probably fix nearly everything. So this is a graphic from the internet. I love the internet. People do amazing things. This is the pudding team. They are data visualizers. And this particular one is media. Who gets to speak, and it's by gender. So look at the bar chart down at the bottom. The blue is men's lines and then women's lines. That's in children's TV. So when we're kids, we learn that the men speak a lot and women speak a little. And so when we grow up, we just act accordingly. And in media, this is 2,000 films. On the left is men's lines to women's lines. Right? So all day long. And then on the right, you can see as we get older, the men get more lines, the women get less. So the whole world is organizing itself in this way because we're watching media. And actually was in the beginning of UN Women, I was a delegate with Gina Davis, the actress, and we were crossing the street right over here. And she started telling me things she had observed around this with her children and how biased children's media is. I'm talking about computer science. It's 15-to-1, boy programmers to girl programmers on screen for our kids. So it's really accelerating some people's confidence and decelerating others. This is a look at Star Wars. And on the left side, these are our colleagues at USC who did this work, and we've been working with them. So you see the 1977, see the yellow is Princess Leia lines, and then we get a little better as we move in time, but not really. Right? So what can we do about it? So we've been using computer science, machine learning, face recognition to try to get into the scripts and into the dailies and into the edit room. Was this your creative intent, or are you doing this accidentally because you grew up in the same world as all of us? Most of the time, it's accidental, the bias, and we can change it. And in fact, we did some studies in terms of you can make more money, a lot more money, if you're more inclusive. More people watch your film, you make more money. So
what was the response when you went to those film rooms?
So Gina has been in with the utmost. We are doing it. People are surprised. They're surprised. They think they're doing better than they're doing because, again, they grew up in the same world as us. This is from when we were in the White House, some of the Presidential Innovation Fellows, of which that's a new job. You can rotate in. There's been 100 of them. It's an innovator in government. They did hack the pay gap because the Department of Commerce was releasing aggregate income data. So tons of data scientists started writing apps and solutions. So this part is sort of a solution-making visual point that we can actually use the same technologies that we're using for self-driving cars and precision medicine for equality and poverty and these things. And here's one of my favorite ones is this one over there. If you, in the e-commerce app, you just change your gender and race and it changes the prices. Hack the foster care. Right? Why aren't we doing that? Why wouldn't foster care be as important to do data science and work there? This is Grace. She's in 10th grade, and she's teaching the police chief to code in New Orleans. So the kids could work on not boring homework. They could work on their hometown for their homework on justice technology. Wouldn't that be a set of data that we could solve? Officer-involved shooting, use of force data, kindness through data. This was cities deciding they were going to open these data sets, and now there's all these community of practice doing peer-to-peer learning. This is real. We could do this across all this stuff. We can move so much faster if you find, scout and scale, find who's already fixed it. Like now I've heard of what you've done. I'm like, why don't we do that everywhere, right? And start sharing. And we did some of this with the census. This is opportunity.census.gov. Most countries' census has the most data. So why is it that the data for place, like streets and addresses, is flying off the shelves, but the data for housing is sitting dusty? So could we get that moving and really have APIs and other things and teach our government folks not to want an app like LinkedIn, you know, if they're in the Department of Labor, but to actually have APIs so LinkedIn and Monster and all these people can make awesome applications for housing mobility, housing affordability for all the people in your country. And we crowdsourced this rubric. So we went and got NASA and NIH and amazing data scientists in government, Department of Energy, to sit with people from State Department or other places who don't have as many data scientists. And what would it look like? What does it look like to have mastery and begin to do this in 2 weeks, just fill in the blank of what it looks like and help our colleagues who don't have data scientists in their team have talent, that group, and others. This is, like all the Google developer groups or meetups all around the world, and most people don't even know they exist in their neighborhood. We did a solution summit here, so we just asked who already solved a lot of the SDGs. And we put up a web page, and we got 1,400 submissions in 3 weeks from 141 countries. So just people already solving SDGs. So this stuff is out there, and I'm showing you imagery of solutions. And the more we share with each other, like everyone in this room probably has something you know about that you're like, God, I wish everybody did this. This particular one is just shouting out to history. That throughout our history, even if it's been erased, people have been using data and data science. This is Jane Addams. How many people know of Jane Addams in this room? Jane Addams won the Nobel Peace Prize for inventing social work. And she worked in industrial Chicago, and guess what? Here's some of her data with her friends. Exactly what you were doing. They were looking at the rhythm of the city. What is the livelihood? Where did you come from? Where are the children? What's going on? And so smart, wise Chicago from the 1800s. So I'll just end there with these images other than to say this gender imbalance in technology is really outrageous when you look at actual history, because women and men of all races invented the technology, even though we erased Ada Lovelace and Ida B. Wells, the data scientist who worked on justice. And so the more we know about Jane and Ida and all these genius people, women and men, have always done this on all topics, the more we'll feel empowered in our nonprofit to have a CTO and in our for-profit to have ethics folks, and blend it up and mix it up. So that's sort of the share what's working part of what I've been thinking about.
In addition to you talking about the visibility of women and the importance of making women more visible, another theme that I heard cutting across everything was how important it is to have diverse voices at the table, and that's something that will return
on the design side. So instead of this idea of making stuff for everyone, why are we doing that? Why aren't they in your team?
Exactly. Anna. So I want to turn to you to talk a bit about the idea of collecting data on women and girls. So you mentioned to me in a call that in September, Facebook announced that it would start sharing data with international organizations over the next 5 years and specifically begin with gender data. So you used to work for the World Bank, and I'm curious to hear, based on your experience, what kind of data you think Facebook should be sharing and prioritizing, and what kind of data do they have access to that other people don't that could be powerful?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you so much for having us, all of Data 2X. We're very excited to be here. And I'll step back a little bit first, just because some of you might wonder, what the heck is Facebook doing here? So I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a perspective of who we are and what we're trying to do. So as I was approached by Facebook about 1.5 years ago at the World Bank, I'd written all these papers for world bankers on how to integrate big data for anything from energy analytics to climate change, low carbon development, whatever it was that I was kind of trying to disrupt at the time. And I think Facebook had just started to realize or started to think a little bit more purposefully around all their social impact programs. There's, I don't know how familiar you are with them, but there's thousands of people working on different social impact programs, anything from like training girls in STEM to building community, working with church leaders, etc. As a startup started as a startup is very sort of still very startup-y culture. So people kind of pick up what they want to work on, which is extremely inspiring and empowering. But it also makes it a little harder to have sort of a cohesive strategy around sort of where do we go and what's the impact and how do we measure the impact and sort of evaluate progress around these programs. So the culture is not to come top down and say, this is now the framework and here's everyone, you have to fall in line. That would never fly. So instead, a very insightful VP of ours, Ime Archibald, decided that he picked up essentially the only agreed upon international framework for what a better world looks like, which would be the UN Sustainability Goals. And said, let's start sort of bottom up and try to align around these. Try to think about what Facebook could do in the coming 10 years to really become a significant contributor to the achievement of the goals, but really focus on what we're good at, like what are our unique superpowers. We're Silicon Valley company, so we talk about superpowers. Apologies in advance. with sort of my development experience, I'm a development economist. I've worked both on the ground with implementing organizations as well as financing agency at the World Bank. I wanted obviously to map everything first. I wanted to get an understanding of like what's going on, what teams are doing what and how and why. So we mapped all the projects that were related to SDGs in the company. And then we kind of got a sense for like which SDGs are we currently working hard on, which ones are we sort of missing out a little bit on. And then we turned to the future. Okay, so based on what we're doing now and where the world needs to be in 2030 and beyond, where are our unique superpowers? So it's excited to talk about, hear you talk about community, because I think that is a really unique area. And the other one, obviously, which I'm here to talk about today, is data. Just a note on the community before I move on. We have about 2.8 billion people who are operating on one of our platforms each month. And in a dream world, I would like to see us leverage that community to drive good on the SDGs. That could be in lots of different ways. It could be crowdsourced information or other ways, but it could also be engaging them to take on local projects, information sharing, whatever that could be. But specifically on data, so we have obviously access to a unique amounts of data, social data. We also have data scientists and very impressive computational powers so that we can run models and build models and algorithms that not a lot of others could do. So we're trying to think of ways to put all of these forces to bear on the SDGs. We don't presume to know that we know what needs to be done. So we're a partnership team. We sit in the partnership org, which means that whatever we will do needs to come from our partners. So starting in September, we organized a bunch of different roundtables on different continents with different stakeholders to really understand what are these questions that people are asking that we still don't have answers to and that we could potentially help answer with our data. So we're focusing on gender data to start with, not exclusively SDG 5, but sort of gender data at large. What are these questions around women and girls' lives that we need answers to? And we are thinking, to specifically answer your question around sort of what data I think we could generate, we're thinking about it sort of in 3 different categories. So one is, what is data that we already have that we could gender disaggregate or we could analyze in a different way? Mm-hmm. That's sort of one area, and I'll give you a couple of examples after. The second area is there new and relevant data that we could collect on purpose for this reason, using our platforms or products? And the third area is really kind of going beyond our data and thinking about, are there sort of data sets or data solutions or tools that could be generated that we could do together with others that might not relate to our data necessarily, but could be sort of a combination of other open data sources that we can model around and create predictive models around, which should also generate insights. So I'll just give you 3 examples and then I'll hand it back to you, Karen. The first one, could we change or could we analyze our data that we currently have in a different way? The first project we're actually embarking on is gender disaggregating our displacement maps. So we have about 100 partners in our Data for Good program. So this is humanitarian development organizations that all are sort of handpicked or vetted against a lot of sort of our assessment of who needs this unique humanitarian detailed data. So first responders and other types of organizations. Mm-hmm. So we asked them, you have all of these disaster maps, all of these different data sets around disasters. What do you need? What is the highest priority for you in terms of gender disaggregation? And they picked displacement maps because they know that women and men leave conflict zones and disaster zones at different times and through different ways. We just don't know exactly how. So these data sets will hopefully help them understand better how these patterns go. So the second one, can we collect new and relevant data? This is where we think both about surveying. We have quite a extensive surveying capacity. We run what's called Future of Business Survey already, which is a small business survey. It's probably the only one of its kind which surveys small businesses in over 100 countries in the world twice a year in partnership with the World Bank and OECD. So we're trying to think about, could we run a survey that's sort of SDG related or maybe women related, trying to think about ways to generate that new data that's on purpose for what the partners need. And the last one, which is more related to creating data sets. I don't know if you're familiar. If you're not, you have to look this out because it kind of blew my mind when I started. Facebook has generated what's called high-resolution population density maps. They're open source. You can find them on Humanitarian Data Exchange. It doesn't use any Facebook data, but it uses lots of different open data sources that we've been able to compile into the richest population data set in the world. We're now gender disaggregating this one so we can see where women and men essentially are located. We're also age disaggregating it. So that's an example of, like, it's not really our data, but we saw that there was a need and we created the data sets.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Our time is slipping away, so I'm going to jump ahead, Carolyn, to you once again. You mentioned to me, which I thought was very novel, that it's also important to think about collecting data that benefits women and girls. So you have a project called Waterphone that specifically was aimed at doing this.
Yes, very nice. It's one of our projects that did not happen. So I hope one of you is going to come afterwards to me and says, let's do it. So I had a PhD candidate, Lipika Bansal. She's half Dutch, half Indian from Delhi. And her concern was with the girls in India who spend hours a day getting the water, 5 to 6 hours on average, which means they cannot go to school. So we thought, that is easy. We just invent a water phone. And the water phone does different things. The water phone can test the water, and while testing, it communicates with the platform. So we get also, after 1-2 years, we have a whole idea where is good water, what is bad water. We can go with that. When the water is not good, an automatic message goes to the water board. The water board takes care of the water tankers, because the girls have to wait for the tankers to come to bring the water. They never know when they come, so the data can also tell you when the tanker is coming. When they know when the tanker is coming, they can go to school for 4 to 5 hours. Then you have the platform, so we know now about where's water. The board is getting feedback that they're doing a really lousy job in giving good water. We also start to teach now about hygiene. What can I use this water for? How can I cook? How can I do laundry? You can also bring it from hygiene to cosmetics, to questions about sex, about boys, about work, about education. Actually, it could become an educational service provider for girls in many places. And this water issue is not only India. It's also in different countries in Africa. It's also in some countries in South America. So girls, especially between, old enough to carry things till they're ready to go marry, they have to spend a lot of time on these kind of tasks. And when we are smart, we can create platforms for them. So that's what I like to do. And we did all the research with the girls in Delhi. We had several groups for a few years. It was very interesting. Of course, they changed the plan. That's how it should be, like you say. So they think that they will actually build the educational service provider themselves. Yeah. So they will teach each other about the water, and they teach each other about the things. So their sort of fundamental research is done, but we need a telco who wants to do it. And we need a good sensor, and the water problem will all be your problem. We all will get this water issue, We all will get bad water. We will all need a water phone. So we better start developing it now.
So the first woman to graduate from MIT went outside and started to measure the water in the river, and became the person that brought ecology into the United States and started doing food treatment, water treatment, Ellen Swallow Richards. But now we have things like Raspberry Pis. So the kids can all have these, right? And the kids can have their own, this is the chip from your mobile phone. But it's really cheap. And in the UK, they're teaching this from second grade. So there's also Girls Who Code. So the girls actually, I think originally founded here, but all over the country and the world, could just make the water phone with you, including the girls in India. So we should figure that out.
Well, then we need to make a plan how to do that.
Yeah, and some adults who help out and coach.
Yeah. I love that you just pulled a Raspberry Pi out of your pocket. Right, yeah.
Oh, but I think what's very important is that we realize that we have this big data capacity. It can be used for the good and the bad and for the power. But there's also a huge potential, because we can real-time share these data. We can co-create, like the Wikipedia, one of the big miracles of this world, that we made it and nobody owns it. It's so cool. So there is so much potential we don't use.
Yeah. This is a perfect interlude into we wanted to get the audience more involved. So now that you've heard all of these wonderful solutions about how to get value from data, I would like you to turn to the person next to you and spend the next 2 minutes talking about either an example that you have in your own work that does the same thing or something that you now are inspired to pursue. And I will give you, at the 1 minute mark, tell you to switch over. And then I'm going to call on random people to share what you came up with.
So something you've seen that's amazing already, or something you've thought of now? Go.
Everyone's so shy.
Sorry about the slides. Are there microphones behind them? You put down one, and I'm not sure where it ran or rolled off to.
No.
Look what I found as a prop. Isn't that good?
That's so funny.
Sorry, is it possible that there's a mic in... Oh, okay. Here we go. That's really... Hold on.
Is my mic on? Okay, so I heard that there was some confusion. I want you to talk with your partner about whether or not you have a project in your work that already fits this solution-driven mindset of getting value out of data for women and girls, or if there's now a project you're thinking about and you're inspired to work on, given the presentations that you've seen. So I'll extend the time by 30 seconds.
Something extraordinary that you've seen.
30 seconds. You are so generous, Karen.
30 seconds. So much
Look at it, 10 IDs in 30 seconds. It's very good. First one was open to I'm talking to Monica.
Let's share. Let's share. 30 more seconds.
You got it. You don't have it.
Okay. Great. So we're now going to come together and share some of the ideas that you just talked about. So I'm going to point to your table and someone stand up and tell the room what their partner said. So over there, please. Anyone from the table with the orange scarf?
Anything you would share?
Anything
Awesome.
Anything awesome. Yes. Stand up and share. Shout it out.
Where's the mic?
Hello. So my colleague Samra and I are from UN Women, and we have there a new gender data portal. And it starts to compile all of this internationally held data from custodian agencies to really look at the gender dimension of all of these issues that we're trying to measure.
Perfect.
Related to the SDGs and otherwise, yeah.
Gender data portal. Excellent. Over there, all the way to the far table where I sit. Does someone want to stand up?
Sure. We basically had a short discussion about methods. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. Okay. Basically about how interesting it is, this idea of integrating sort of traditional econometric methods with new data sources and what you can learn from applying that approach.
Awesome. Integrating new data sets. Someone from back here.
or anyone.
Anyone? Anyone in this section? Would someone like to stand?
Something awesome someone told you that everybody should know. What is it? Yeah.
Nobody dares to speak.
Hi, from the Department of Youth and Community Development. So we collect the data and hear the public about their complaints. The majority of our budget is go to youth programs. So the mothers are the one applying for the programs for the kids and teens. And one of the complaints were that they had to miss work, they had to miss appointments, medical appointments, and so many things doing lines to apply for the programs in person. So we create Discover DYCD. We just launched it 2 months ago, and we're still improving it. So in this website, the public can apply there to multiple programs from using their phone or their computers without missing work or for the community commodity of their house or work or anywhere they are.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Why don't we take one more in this section? Would someone like to stand?
Anybody? Something
Don't be
awesome.
shy. Yes.
All in the back.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Alsner. I work with Megan at Shift 7. We have an awesome data set of solution makers from around the world from 5 years of UN Solution Summit. So anybody who's working on figuring out how these folks can help each other or more people can work with them, come talk to us. But within that, I want to mention one in particular that's relevant to this panel. And it's called Cyber Harassment Hotline, and they're looking at abuses online in Pakistan, and in particular of women, and in particular that result in honor killings. And they've been saying that Facebook has been a really important partner and has been very responsive and very helpful in taking things down. But I think it would be great if we could all work together and with Facebook on also figuring out how this can be prevented in the first place, or use big data to identify the posts so that an NGO doesn't have to flag it and have it taken down to help with one of the toughest challenges of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I hope that, I know that exercise was a bit sudden, and I should have prepared people for the audience interaction, but I hope it inspires you to realize how many solutions there are. And so at this point, I want to talk about, now that we have all of these amazing ideas and solutions, how to build the infrastructure around it to make sure that they're implemented in ethical ways. So one theme that we've already talked about is the importance of having many different perspectives and having diversity in the designers of these systems. So I want each of you to weigh in on this. Megan, do you want to start?
Yeah, one of the things that happens in oppression is you convince people to not use the power tools of the day. So the fact that there's not as at scale women and people of color in data science and computer science is a very serious problem for the world. It's one of the biggest problems in the world because we want everybody to use the power tools of the day. And I'm so excited about UN Women. And it's interesting to think that, like, in the founding of UN Women, we didn't have data right away in this way. Why wasn't there a data portal immediately? But it's part of oppression. To keep, if you go talk about women, we're not going to talk about technology. If we're going to go talk about with the technology, it's all these guys, a majority race of their country. So just noticing that and then figuring how to do things about it. The way to do things about it is notice it's not a pipeline problem, it's a culture problem. We've had plenty of technical people around the whole time. It's just they can't get in and they're not being advanced, and also their ideas aren't accelerated. So when you're in the code review or whatever, their ideas, it's not as important as my idea, right? So who gets to set the agenda? Who gets all the money? You know, it's, what is it? Crazy amount of venture capital just goes to one group. So just broadening that out, and there's lots of things. We wrote a thing in the White House called Raise the Floor, which lists all the practices you can do as a leader in your advancement in the pipeline and in the ecosystem. Here's the practice. Here's what it looks like. Here's how you measure it. I did it with Laura Weidman Powers, who created Code 2040. And so that's the kind of stuff we can share what's already working and accelerate stuff. The last thing I'd share is that on the slide before I had Ida B. Wells. Ida was, her friends were dragged from the store in the 1800s because they were successful and they were executed. And she was an amazing journalist, and she did the data science work to look at lynching in America at that time and wrote the Red Record. One of America's greatest data scientists, Ida B. Wells, one of the co-founders of the NAACP. And so Ida and Frederick Douglass, you guys may or may not have ever heard of the Chicago World's Fair, the Columbian Exhibition, where Tesla and Edison, this is 1892, very famous moment, everybody, all eyes on Chicago visiting. Ida and Frederick Douglass, great civil rights leaders, protested that fair because for 3 years prior to the fair, they tried to have an African-American pavilion. And on the internet is the list of all the members, and I want to recreate it in VR and AR because there were all these patent holders and sculptors and doctors and architects, all these African-Americans 20-something years after slavery who would have shown off their genius. And last year on the CES stage, there were no African-Americans. This is not a pipeline problem. The town is not allowed in. And so it's one of the greatest challenges we face because all the people who would solve all the problems we're talking about don't get the education, the access, the funding, the thing that they need. And we have to work in solidarity to do that and use genius things like you are talking about and everybody just mentioned in here. So I can't wait to get that done with all of you and all of you on live stream, wherever you are.
I think what you mentioned was so important about like the intersectionality as well. We've been talking a lot about gender, but there are many other elements that we need to consider alongside gender. Carolyn.
Yes, thank you so much for what you said. So I will take another thing. I'm also the Chief Science Officer of the Municipality of Amsterdam. And in our local ecosystem, we don't own the data of our city often. So in the local system, for us, it's really important to get the right laws and the right checks and balances and an ecosystem that's mature and that is resilient and that can also allow for rights to be executed. What I find interesting is that the council has now accepted a TADA, so the reverse of data. It's called TADA. And it's really interesting because it's written by two women who said, we are done with all the expertise on data. We just want to have some simple principles that from now on we want as a reference point. So, for example, I own my own data. But since the council has approved of this, we now have a register for sensors, for algorithms, all those kind of things. It also says, for example, I have the right to go over the street without being filmed, or tracked or traced. When I first heard this, I thought this is naive, because we have so many cameras. But because this is accepted as a sort of the basic fundamental right, integrity of body and mind, it's in all our constitutions, we just have to go back to some common sense. So we have in streets, it says a little sign, if you enter in the street, you will be filmed. So I can walk around the street. So I find sometimes that, it's only 25 years that we are used to all these big companies ruling the world. I think they should not rule the world. I mean, I like you, but I don't think your company should rule the world. I think we need democratic order, and that can only happen when we have good laws. What I find interesting is that in Europe we now have GDPR since a year. Everybody was afraid it would break down competition, it would be bad for business. We find it's just the reverse. GDPR appears to be really good for European business. And in data meetings we have with all the companies, we say we want more rules to make the competition better and also more to be relied upon. So the relation between a good market is organized in a democracy and not the other way around. The companies cannot organize democracy. Democracy has to make the market for the companies. So my plea is to, also for the girls and the women, but also for the men and the boys, and also for everyone who doesn't feel a man or a boy, and also for the plants and the animals, really. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. Ecology is really fundamental. The rivers need rights. The trees need rights. We need to get our law system back into shape, out of the greed.
Anna, you have a chance to defend yourself now, and also contribute to this question of how do we get more people to the table.
Yes. I mean, I don't think my company should rule the world either, so I think we're pretty aligned there. Yeah, I think it's sitting at a company in Silicon Valley. I'm a woman. I'm a foreigner. Obviously, there's lots of other minorities that are less represented than my group, but it's really difficult. I think to your point, Megan, I don't think it's it's not a pipeline issue. It's a purposeful, taking purposeful action around this. And I think, I mean, I actually last night read a good article from our new CMO, who is from Latin America. And he talked about all the different diversity initiatives that kind of crowd each other out and almost eat the energy of each other. So I think just kind of streamlining it a little bit better. I'll look into your Raise the Floor manual. Maybe that's something we can look at. But I think we have a really, really long way to go.
Yeah.
The number one thing is that the leadership has to increase the priority. So right now, diversity is a lot of RPM, not a lot of MPH in these companies, in most companies, most organizations, because it's in the top 20, but it's not in the top 3. But as you move it up, we've seen the companies when they do it, and there's particular practices that we all can share that work pretty well. It's the problem of our time. How are we going to include everyone into the future? And it's urgent.
I have one more question before we turn it to the audience for questions. And that is, each of you sort of have experiences working in various different sectors. So are there, from those experiences, are there partnerships that we should be developing between public and private, between academic and government, that you think there should be more of? Like, are there good examples that you already see that we should be multiplying?
Yeah, a long time ago, 25 years ago actually, next weekend, we founded Waag Society, which is an independent media lab where artists really set the tone. And what's great to work with artists, you make things that fuel the debate with people. So there's this beautiful book of Arthur Koestler, Darkness at Noon in English, where he says, if society, everyone who's participating in society should understand the society. Should understand the technology that's being used in a society. And then, in that sense, we have not overcome the bicycle yet. Because not everybody understands how a bicycle works. So, artists and culture can help make technology visible, understandable, can fuel the debate, and can also help to fuel imagination. I look like great that I do rhythm, but really, we need a million concepts like this. Nature is so rich, and we are very rich, and with too many screens, we all dumb down. A friend of mine, he said before there were 2,000 or 5,000 stories of Rama, and now there are 3 left. It's like with, Snow White. We had so many versions, we have only 1 left. So media that you address in your talk is very important. So I think the diversity, the imagination, and really the arts should be here.
Yeah, very much so. I think, I don't know, I was just thinking about Ada Lovelace, who was the woman who, she really founded computer science and coding and this idea. She's Lord Byron's poet math daughter. She said, I think we could find a calculus of the nervous system. She said, I think we could think about how, like, the math of our minds, like we figured out the math of the planets, and said, I wish to bequeath to the generation a calculus of the nervous system. And this is in 1840 when Darwin wrote about the past of us. She wrote about the future of us. And so how can we feel the confidence that everybody is involved, that what Ada was thinking, Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley at that time. Her mother died in childbirth, one of the greatest, the Vindication of the Rights of Women, one of the greatest feminist writers. This idea of Frankenstein, should we raise the monster or not? I think we should figure out the laws, that we want to have in what we do. The thing that I found is the best thing is both this scout and scale, which is go look for what's already there. Every time you're like, oh my God, what should we do about this? Just look up and say, I wonder who, and there they are. And someone another like it, and then a community practice, and the seed round is them talking. And then Series A is you can IPO these ideas by getting people who'd like to try and shift that way. The second one is partnerships. But one of the biggest challenges, like when you go to companies or tech, the engineers are in charge and the policy and comms people at the bottom, right? And then you go to government and flip, policy and comms in charge, and engineers aren't even invited because we're the implementation, we're the help. So the architecture is wrong. So it's both meeting each other, but it's also cross-pollinate. So for example, a surgeon general, we don't want all the doctors in our government, but we'd like a Surgeon General or a couple people who are in the room. So if we talk about medical things, we're not completely off. And also maybe there's something we're talking about where a medical idea would be relevant and we wouldn't have even thought of it if they weren't there. So data science, chief technology officer, these different characters together with social scientists, artists, youth, elders, all the different people working together. So it's this cross-pollinate lightly across, go where there's tons of you, go where there's rare, and mix it up, and then partnerships to scale those insights.
Yeah, I would. I've never been in a partnership role specifically until I came to Facebook, but I hadn't realized that I probably have always been in a partnership role. Just never called myself that. So the three things that I would distill this to, and this kind of drawing both upon sort of being an implementing agency in rural Mozambique to kind of World Bank and now Facebook, is for any successful partnership, you need to really quickly understand the incentives on both sides. So what's driving the conversation? Why are you sitting across from each other in a table? What do you want to get out of this? And clearly define, like, what's the win? Like, are you happy with a headline, a news headline somewhere? Do you need a project implemented on the ground? You need to see the impact, the effect of it. And how will you track it internally? And how does the counterpart plan to track that? And that's often very different, particularly when we think about public-private partnerships. So, and the other one that I would say specifically now, thinking a lot about the partnerships that we're setting up around data sharing, it's really important to understand the data use or the data need of the counterpart in a partnership. So is it an advocacy organization? Then probably sort of index level data and sort of kind of infographics are what they're looking for, not actually raw data sets that we have engineers working hours and hours to try to crunch out. So just kind of gauging also what the counterpart needs and what they're going to use it for, I think is quite helpful. And I found that sometimes that's not 100% clear in the partners that we talk to. So even just kind of crafting that jointly, asking the right questions and try to understand what this partner is hoping to get out of a partnership. I mean, wherever we go and we say we have data to share, everyone's like, yes, let's talk. But it actually takes quite a long time to figure out what is a win for both sides, and also how, like, does both organizations have the right capacity to treat the data? I mean, we're very concerned about privacy preserving techniques these days, obviously, for many reasons. So we need to make sure that the partners that we work with have a similar level of data governance, that we can that can be acceptable to our terms, etc. And I think that's difficult if you're a small organization. It's also difficult to kind of negotiate that with a large tech company as a counterpart. So I think there are tons of challenges, but obviously, as have been talked about today, massive opportunities also to create these powerful partnerships.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that you said the importance of making sure that when you're in a partnership that there's values alignment across both partners. So we have 10 minutes for questions. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for the conversation. I mean, very interesting. What I also see more and more in conferences is that the human and social aspect of the conversation becomes really increasingly important versus the technical aspect of the conversation, and that's very good. But my question to you is, in a society which is increasingly polarized, when you talk about values, I think that's probably the center of the conversation that we should have between now and the coming 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But in an increasingly polarized society, how do we manage to get like a kind of an alignment or a way to align on something that makes sense for more or less everybody? Because it looks like it's increasingly difficult to do so in the political arena today. So how do we do this?
Well, I like to talk from my municipal perspective. I notice that most people don't dare to listen. And really just sit together, don't do incentives immediately. First sit, take some time, listen, and then you start to see there maybe a gap or something you find interesting, and then you explore. And that's how it starts. And then you have to be willing, when it's uncomfortable, to stay. Don't walk away, stay. You know, and that's how it starts. And that's how you start. All the kids people think they're stupid or terrible, you know. Nobody listens to them. You have to sit and talk. It's really about time. It's not about purpose. It's not about judgment on goals. It's about being together, I would say.
Wonderful. Can we have a question over here? Yes.
Hi, yes, thank you for the comments on community inclusion, which I think is so important. But the communities that I work with and the community-based organizations that I talk to, in many cases, like, don't need more data to do their work. They already know what works. They already know what they need. They cannot get funded for it. And in particular, they cannot get funded without collecting a ton of data. So I've been resonating with a quote from Ruha Benjamin, who talks about the datafication of injustice, where the hunt for more and more data is a barrier to acting on what we already know. And also just want to point out, like, it's great that Facebook is putting a lot of muscle behind trying to do good things with its data, but after it's proven over and over again how very misaligned its incentives are, like, why should we ever be turning to this private corporation in order to, what's alarming to me is the idea of collecting more data, but also given that de-identification is a myth, especially when you're doing data sharing and when you're joining up data sets. I'm just really, alarmed by a lot of this and just wondering, what comes up in terms of what the steps that need to be taken are for governance and for real inclusion of communities who in many cases do not want more data collected about them at all.
Anna, do you want to take that?
Hey, sure. Yeah, thank you for your concerns. I think it's valuable and happy to talk more in the sidelines of specific communities or areas of concern. I just want to say that we provide all of our privatization methodologies, the way that we treat the data that we share in peer-reviewed journals. So all the methodologies are out there, shared publicly. So very happy to put you in the right direction so you can look at them. I think that's considered a pretty good standard for all of our data for good releases recently, but happy to give you more information about it.
I also think, as a municipality, I'm not sure how it works here, but we are really bad at supporting communities. So we say we want it, but we don't. And the moment you do more than one thing, so for example, at the moment I'm trying to fund a food forest in an urban area. Been working on it for a year. I have seen 30 cabinets, and I was sent to 50 others. And that's because we don't know how to integral policy making. It's and social and ecology, and it's for elderly and it's for youth, and they get completely confused. So we are in silos as a municipality. I'm sure it's probably here the same. And we don't know how to deal with you when you are really good. We sort of say, give us data. And then it doesn't make it. So the trust between government and citizens is very broken in many places, even on a very local level. And I think that's very alarming. That has to do... Oh, sorry, there's a lady who wants to comment. Yes, please.
I understand some of the concerns that are raised about communities and also agree that they need funding. But as I heard this panel speak, I think that data can help us understand each other. That if we were to look at the rhythms across culture and intersectionally, we would have a better understanding of each other. I know my culture, and you may not know my culture as well. One example today, when you single out training of young people, you neglect rhythms within societies with bias where certain groups get access later and they get education and entry later. But I wanted to compliment you on your comments as a panel.
Thank you so much.
I went... I was lucky when we left the White House. My friend Leanne Pittsford created something. She created an organization called Lesbians Who Tech. She did it because every time she went to LGBTQ things, it was mostly men, and every time she went to tech things, it was mostly men. So she made this Lesbians Who Tech. So now it has 50,000 people in it. And it's a crazy, fun organization. But her idea was to go on a tech jobs tour across the United States. And we just went to 25 different cities, and it was really just to have people locally meet each other, but we came to town to meet them. And it was incredible, and I think you could go to any country. I've done this a little bit in Afghanistan and other places, there's so many genius people in each place, but neighbors don't know each other. And there's these opportunities like how we started to come together as a community. And it's interesting, like we talked about broadband, and then what are we going to do about broadband for everybody to get online, right? Most people don't know, but Chattanooga, Tennessee has the highest speed internet in the Western Hemisphere. And they have that because they came together as a community and organized themselves around this tech. And now they're doing really interesting things. And the entrepreneurs, much more diversity and inclusion, and much more inclusion of the youth. And these cadences of how to find what people are trying to accomplish themselves, listening, and then scouting out for things that are really working and sharing them better. Like we have this internet. We could use it to share solutions much faster and connect with each other and listen better. And instead, it's really being used to divide us into media silos. I recommend to everybody to watch the TED Talk, Weapons of Math Destruction, that Cathy O'Neill did, or see Joy Buolamwini's TED Talk. We talked about her earlier. Or Amy Webb has written a book about whether the tech titans, how they're distorting and what we could do. And I love the introduction she wrote. It's called The Big Nine, because she welcomes everybody into the AI conversation. Everybody has something to say. The tech teams, the coders are not in charge of it. It's all of us.
Will you say so? Thank you so much for your remark, because what's so nice, we work with a tabla player, to understand rhythm in data. So the computer scientists have to play tabla to understand rhythm. It's quite painful for them. And what is interesting, if you look at a neighborhood or a city, we have many rhythms. So it's rhythms in rhythms. So how do you organize rhythms in rhythms? It's exactly what you were saying. Because every culture, this neighborhood where you work is 180 nationalities, not even more cultures, is about you have to share the first beat. But we have lost our capacity for rhythm in the cities. We don't hear it anymore. We don't even know when there is a first beat. So one of the things we think about with this research, that the data research on rhythm can help to make the first beat between the different cultures, to make it more easy to live together. And that's why this borough now wants to use it for their policy making, because if we can identify the first beat of this group of elderly ladies and that group of youngsters, and you know when you have to share a beat, and whether it's a festival or a light or I don't know, whatever it is. So it's very interesting. Thank you for that remark. It's deep rhythm knowledge that you are giving here.
We are almost out of time, so I actually want to end with one more question for all of you. What is one action item that you can give to everyone in this room to start doing tomorrow in their work to help empower women and girls through data?
I brought this funny one. I was at the Grace Hopper celebration, and Disney made Minnie Mouse coding. And so, like, can we see more imagery of everybody in the power seat doing whatever, music, coding, whatever those different things are? So when you come in, like, invite more people into the conversation, and then look around for things that are already there that are solving, and help that person, just like you're like a venture catalyst and helping just innovators around and connect with each other. The storytelling part of this is probably the most missing, because there's great stuff that's already here and nobody knows. And the more we knew, we'd just do that, and it'd be a lot easier and less daunting.
Yeah, I would just say probably be a role model. I mean, all of you in this room have plenty of experience and really great ways of being and doing. And I think just kind of stand up for that and be a role model. I have 2 little kids, and I'm trying really hard to be a good role model for both of them, both my son and my daughter. And I think that's probably the most important thing that we can be.
I'd say don't take anything for granted that you see or that just being told to you. So ask questions, really about how data is constructed, how the facts are made. I think there's so much really that we should question on this. That's the one thing. And the other thing is listen. Take time to listen. Yeah.
Let's thank our panelists.